Well, hello, friends, and we certainly do hope that you're enjoying the study that we're going through and the sessions that it presents to all of us. Now, we know that over time, questions may come up, observations, and or even statements that you would like to share with us, and we wanted to introduce to you a means by which you can make contact with us, and that is through email at billw@cgi.org. That's billw@cgi.org. We would love to hear from you to help us out as well, because so often, we get into a mindset perhaps and are not aware necessarily of things that are crossing your mind as a result of the material that we may be covering. So don't be shy, don't be bashful, don't hesitate if indeed a question may emerge through the presentations that we share with you, and go ahead and just email us at this billw@cgi.org email address, and we will get them and hopefully over the ensuing weeks be able to address some of them, even perhaps subjects that you would like to see us address. We'd be more than happy to take some of those ideas and maybe build presentations around them. So one more time, billw@cgi.org if you have any questions or statements or observations to make, and we'll look forward to receiving those requests from you. So in the meantime, let's now get back to the study that we're going through. But I wanted to launch back into the presentation that I had going a couple of weeks back regarding marriage. Specifically, it was titled, if you recall, Spiritually Inoculating Our Marriages. Spiritually Inoculating Our Marriages. And let me recap here for a moment. The last time I was up here, and many of you remember, I went through some of the particulars regarding singles, and of course those of us in God's church that have a particular challenge with that, especially if we are dating outside of the faith, and of which oftentimes does indeed occur, and I think we would be, what you would say, remiss in not accepting the fact that there are many ladies and men, singles, that do date outside the church simply because I guess the pickings are slim inside the church. And in all due respect, needless to say, some go outside the church looking for a mate and or for a dating companion of sort that might lead into mating, of which, and I mean that by marriage, of which would later on then, of course, develop into a long-term relationship. And we covered quite a few things in that area, as well as the meaning of marriage and why marriage and the institution of it is so important. Let me take just a moment here to remind all of us that marriage is a divine institution. And for the sake of not belaboring but reiterating the points, it is an institution that reflects a spiritual meaning, a very important spiritual meaning. And that spiritual meaning is, very simply, God's relationship with His church. And the physical union of marriage represents that spiritual connection that God has in His church. And in simple meaning of that basically illustrates the importance of marriage, because that's why it's divine. Now, needless to say, marriage, as I pointed out, has been abused in terms of its definition. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail and belabor that point, but I think many of us know that homosexual marriages are now legalized. We've got people living with one another, shacking up, as they would call it in modern vernacular, and basically abusing the whole imagery of the marriage institution, as well as the sexual relationship of a man and a woman, a man and a single woman, not two women or two men, not man and man, not woman and woman. The Bible's very clear. We went through those details on my last one. I won't belabor it, but if indeed you're interested in reviewing that, you can get part one. I think the date was sometime the end of August, a couple of weeks back. This is September 5th. But I wanted to illustrate, because I felt a little bit rushed at the end there, go back to revisit this single arrangement, and that is the concerns for singles dating outside of the church, to reiterate something over here in 1 Corinthians. And I'd like to, 2 Corinthians, and I'd like to just kind of reiterate this real quickly here before we move on. And that is in verse 14, breaking into the context, chapter 6, 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14, real quickly here. Be you not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. Now, Paul was pretty adamant about this, but he was coming from a framework that goes back to Deuteronomy, which I will go back to here in a moment. But I just want to mention these few scriptures here to illustrate to you the insistence of Paul's concern with regards to brethren, be they sisterin or brethren in the church, dating outside of the church. And the reason being is because it's obviously going to create potentially conflict. It is. It just is. You might end up with somebody that likes to eat different foods than you're eating. Dietary, as fundamental as that. Dietary differences. As fundamental as holidays. It's fundamental. Christmas and Easter and different traditional holidays that, okay, maybe it's not a big deal between you and he, but what happens when you have children? Now what? So you see these potholes that could be, and where Paul's coming from the pagan society in the city of Corinth, he's saying, brethren, FYI, heads up. Because you're going to be running into some real conflict, and if not conflict, you may run into some tension. Because the mate that you're going with, that you intend to long-term develop a relationship in, namely marriage, you're going to find yourself coming up against obstacles, differences of opinion about certain things. And so, as Jesus said, I have not come to make peace. I've come to set the mother-in-law against the father-in-law. I've come to set the kids against the fathers against the mothers. Why is that? Well, here you are on Saturday for Sunday. Traditional Christianity, the vast majority, let me remind you of the 2+ billion traditional Christians on this planet, keep Sunday as an observance and call it, in many of their bits of literature, a Sabbath. And it's no more a Sabbath than Monday is, or Tuesday. The Sabbath of your Bible, any scholar will tell you, including the Catholics and all the Protestants, in your Bible, the Bible Sabbath, from Genesis to Revelation, is a sunset to sunset, Friday to Saturday. That is your Sabbath. But the Catholic Church, we know, shifted it, we know, and the Protestants adopted it, we know. And that's history. That can be discovered in any history book, not in our literature, although we have literature that will help you find out where it is in history. Nevertheless, that's history. That's just plain, simple history. So Paul here is referencing this Deuteronomy 7, and I want to go back to that just real quickly because I didn't have time last week to go back to it, so I wanted to go back to it here, Deuteronomy chapter 7, to show you where he's coming from in terms of his context. Because remember, Paul was a Pharisee. He was well schooled in the Old Testament. Why was he referencing the Old Testament? Because the Old Testament was the Bible of the early New Testament church. There was no New Testament in those first centuries when Paul was speaking. There was no New Testament. It was the Old Testament. Those were the scriptures the church referenced as authoritarian. They referenced them as guideposts. They referenced them as their guidance on what to eat, how to live, and what was important and what was not important, what was legal and what was illegal, what was proper and right and what was wrong and improper. So here he comes from Deuteronomy 7, where God says very quickly here, in verse 1, chapter 7, book of Deuteronomy, when the Lord your God shall bring you into the land where you go and possess it, and have cast out all the nations before you, the Hittites and the Girgashites and so forth, the Amorites and so on, and Hivites and what have you. In verse 2, when the Lord your God shall deliver them, these essentially heathen civilizations, these heathen cultures, these heathen ethnic individuals, not different races. We need to stop talking in terms of race. We're all the human race. These Hivites and Jebusites and all kinds of ites were human beings. They were human beings. They were of the human race, but they were ethnically different. Ethnically different. And so God was saying, don't mix with them. Why? Because inter-ethnic marriage is wrong? No. Look at this right here. It goes on, verse 3, neither shall you make marriages with them. Your daughters you shall not give unto, thy daughters you shall not give unto his son, nor his daughter shall you take unto their son. For they will turn your son from following me. That was the concern God had with this. It was a matter of them going off the rails and beginning to worship pagan gods. That the pagan or the heathen would influence the Israelite into worshiping another god. And God says, I'm a jealous guy. I don't like that. So Paul is saying, look, you marry somebody who's from another religion. You marry a Muslim. You marry a Buddhist. You marry a Baptist. You marry a Presbyterian. You marry a Catholic. You've got some conflicts potentially. Right off the bat, holidays. Right off the bat, dietary laws. Right off the bat, different types of likes and dislikes. Maybe even arguments, especially if it's a Baptist saying to you, hey, the law's been done away with. You don't need to keep that Saturday Sabbath you've been keeping for the last 20 years of your life or 30 years of your life, assuming, of course, you're a young person. But maybe you're an older person, single, looking for a mate as well. Well, it applies to you too. You could be in your 50s or 60s looking for a mate. And again, if you're dating outside the church, watch out, because here you are 30 or 40 years in God's church, and now all of a sudden you start dating a woman, and she's not of your faith, and guess what? All of a sudden, we find that you begin to drift. And don't say it doesn't happen. I've seen it in my ministry happen to people in God's church, where they were in God's church for 30, 40 years. They married a lady outside of the church, and she was a strong personality, took him right out of the church. I mean, of the church. So these things happen, brethren, and we can't have our eyes closed when going ahead and dating outside of the church. These are things that you need to take into consideration, especially, we're not talking short-term here. We're not talking one-night stands. We're talking if you're dating for a long-term relationship and you're looking to this lady, you're looking to this guy to be your husband or wife, that means a relationship's going to develop. That means some real intimate kinds of differences of opinion and beliefs and things are ultimately going to come head to head, ultimately going to lock horns, ultimately are going to come face to face with having to address some of these things. So you better know who she or he is before you say the I do's. You really do need to vet this very importantly, and that's why I emphasized sex out of wedlock, fornication, is nothing more than a big distraction. It's a big distraction because it affords you not to get to know the person because you're preoccupied with you know what. Instead of the brain anatomy, you're occupied with or preoccupied with different other parts of the anatomy, and of which is distracting to getting to know the individual's heart or mind on things of this sort. And so Paul is saying, look, he says, in verse 15, I'm back now to 2 Corinthians chapter 6, 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 15. What concord has Christ with Belial? Verse 15, 2 Corinthians 6. Or what part has he that believes with an infidel? He gets pretty tough. I mean, you got to either love Paul or hate Paul. I mean, he was very pointed, he was very frank. He says, and what concord has and what agreement has the temple of God, verse 16, the temple of God with idols? For you are the temple of the living God. As God has said, I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Wherefore come out from among them. Be you separate, says the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. And if you don't think you're going to have problems, just think about the days of unleavened bread. And here you are, you want to put all your leaven in one cupboard because you're living with somebody that doesn't believe in the days of unleavened bread. And so you want to put all the leaven in one cupboard because that's your little compromise about, trying to keep peace in the family because you want to stay true to God, so you're going to do, in principle, get all the leaven out of the house. But you can't get all the leaven out of the house because your mate doesn't want all the leaven out of the house because he's still eating bread. And I'm still going to have my bacon in the morning. Okay, but it's days of unleavened bread, so honey, in due respect, I'm going to put all the leaven in the cupboard. What if he doesn't want it? What if she doesn't want it? What if she says, you're disorienting me? I mean, these are the kind of little things, just little things, that can aggravate and cause problems as you go on in the future, which we're going to talk about here in a moment. So all I'm saying, single people, really take the time, as I tried to mention this in part one, to get to know the individual that you are truly dating, because if not, you run the risk, very big risk and gamble of going into a relationship. If you think you could change them, you're going in on the wrong premise. Do not. If you can't like them for who they are at the time you're dating, don't go into that relationship thinking you're going to change them. That is a gamble and a risk, like rolling the dice and hoping for snake eyes. Because one thing's for sure, God does the calling. You see, God does the calling. So be careful. Take your time. Take your time. And let time have its way with you. As I used to tell my daughters, when you go out with him, spill hot soup on his lap and see what he does. You know, as I say, figuratively speaking, to see what kind of reaction you get out of him. You know, what does he do? You know, what kind of language does he use? What did he call you when you did that? And all the things that go along with it. But at least you get to know. I mean, if somebody tells me, oh, we've been dating Mr. Watson for 2 years and we've never had a fight, bing, my antenna go up. Immediately. Yeah, we've been dating for 2 years, never had a fight. Never had, really? Then you don't know each other yet. You know, that's one side of him or her you don't know. You need to fight to see how you fight. Because guess what? You will fight when you get married. Now, the rules, obviously, of engagement need to be understood, but nevertheless, being realistic about things, in marriage, we fight. We do. We have disagreements. And consequently, we get through them. Because divorce isn't the solution. You don't cut and run. Oh, that's it. I'm insulted. Bam, I'm out the door, you know. There's many more fish in the sea. No. You fight through it, you wrestle through it, and you become better for it on the other side and bigger for it, you know. So keep these things in mind, young people, because, again, you never know what you pick up. You might pick up somebody that's vulgar and you don't realize it, somebody that's got a secret lifestyle about pornography or something you don't know about, something, certainly you'd know he or she was a smoker. But these are all things, brethren, that if they are what they are when you're dating, consider the lot you're considering. And don't go into the lot thinking you can change it, because that is, as I say, a gamble that I wouldn't want to take, and I certainly don't recommend any of us taking. But if you date out of the church, just concede to the fact that you're going to have issues and limitations, and beware of it. And also that your faith may very well be tested as well. So, with that being said, moving on, divorce today is still tragically high. It's down, believe it or not. I was surprised in reviewing some of my stats on this presentation. I found that marriage in the United States is 1 out of 3 instead of 1 out of 2 now. However, before you get too encouraged over that, understand that people are marrying less and shacking up more. And I've often said, if I didn't have God in my life, why would I want to marry a woman and let her have access to my assets? I wouldn't. And if she's willing to shack up with me, what's the point of marriage? If marriage doesn't mean anything to me, of course, and I'm being facetious, so don't take me out of context. I'm being facetious. But the point that I want to make here in this is that marriage, if indeed we go into it, is an important institution and something that we need to all be aware of and go into it with our eyes wide open. And unfortunately, though, 33% of us, as of today in the United States of America, 33% of us, of the lesser that are getting married, are still resulting in divorce. And get this statistic. I was shocked. You ready for this one? Amazing. Since March of this year, 2020, since this Chinese Communist Party virus hit and shut down the United States of America and put all of us back in our homes to reacquaint ourselves with our mates, has not been the most encouraging stat resulting from it. As a matter of fact, the result of this pandemic, as we've been told it is, and of which is, in fact, impacting many of us in our relationships with this respect, the percentage of divorces in the area of relationships here in the United States since March, where is that? I had it written here. It was there this morning. There it is up 30%. Since March, divorces in the United States are up 30%. Why do you think that is? We're going to talk a little bit about that. Why do you think that? That is a stunning statistic of why divorces would increase that much in a matter of 3 to 4 months in this respect. I mean, it's really just stunning, and yet it is still so very, very rampant. Couples are indeed suffering in their relationships. And oftentimes, sadly, it's better off that they are apart from one another in order for them to continue to get along, if for no other reason, for the sake of their children. Because you know and I know, oftentimes the sad part about the situations of mom and dad not getting along is the collateral damage that occurs to the children. It's very disrupting to a child's mind, especially if they're very young. Even teenagers, for that matter, are certainly disrupted by it as well. And so the point of it is, though, in this regard, it stands to reason as well, because of all the accesses, the venues, the doorways, the avenues, the pathways into marriage that there are to disrupt. It's a no wonder that marriages or divorces are increasing 30% in the last 4 months or so, in lieu of the fact that more time now is being spent together. And the reason I say that confidently as well, get this clear in your minds, brethren. Satan, the devil, does not want your marriage to succeed. He hates marriage. He hates everything it stands for. And as I mentioned at the outset of the presentation here, he stood, that is, the marriage institution stands for God's relationship with His church. And when it stands for God's relationship in His church, Satan, the devil, just sees rage. He wants it destroyed. He doesn't want children in a stable mode. He'd rather see them out on the streets in riot gear. Satan wants your family to blow up. And he will use every device and anything he can to worm his way between you, your mates, and even your children. And nothing is off limits. All's fair in this game. He will even use your children against you, and perhaps even use the children to divide and then conquer the marriage. And how does he do that? Children are dynamic. They start out at 0 and go up to about 18 to 20, 21. In today's day and age, they're even maybe 30 years old and they're still at home. But the bottom line is they change. That's what I'm trying to explain here. They change. And with those changes what becomes is more different friends, different habits. And you know the progression of a young child. You know, from 0 to 5 to 10 to 12 to 15 to 16, drive the car now. They got keys of a car, probably from you, who's paying the bill. They get a job. They got friends that you never realized. Who's this guy? Who's this girl? Spending too much time on the internet. I mean, on and on you go. Addictions occur, and the child is used as a tool to bring down the family. Or the children are used. To bring down the family, or to divide the family, to create tension. Satan, the devil, is a master at this because he knows your weaknesses too, and he'll use that to compound the situation in many respects. And these venues that he uses, and sometimes we self-inflict upon ourselves. So let's not blame the devil like old Flip Wilson used to say, the devil made me do it, you know. No, not always. Not always. Oftentimes it's just our weaknesses and our lack of able to discipline ourselves to do certain things that we know to be right. But there are many categories that Satan will use, as well as we ourselves just by default will occur to cause tension, disruption, division, and possibly even divorce, or lead to divorce. And I'm talking in the context of marriage here, brethren. One of those avenues is burnout. That's a very common one. Burnout, or what you could say, growing apart. Familiarity. The Righteous Brothers had a song about this. Lost that lovin' feeling. Remember that song? Lost that lovin' feeling. Two people get together, you know, they're married, and years 1 through 5 are great. After 5 and 6 and a couple of kids, they begin to wane a little bit. Things begin to cool off. The bedroom's not as hot as it used to be. And lo and behold, they're distracted with a lot of things, career pursuits, financial issues. We're going to get into some of that as well. But the point that I want to make here is they grow apart. One takes off on a different career path, perhaps, with the wife and the husband's both working nowadays. And lo and behold, this growing apart becomes less and less affectionate, and it leads to a burnout, losing that loving feeling, and consequently they cannot recover that and reconnect. Another one that is certainly a very viable one, matter of fact, I grew up in this kind of environment, my environment as a kid, and that was a very conflicting environment, an environment of conflict where the mother and the father are constantly yelling at one another. Everything, pick your battles. But in my case, my parents, oftentimes, everything was a battle. Everything was a fight. Everything was yelling. Everything was, violent in some respects. And consequently, me as an only child grew up in this kind of environment and saw this kind of a thing. It was a conflicting environment to grow up in. And then you wonder why children kill themselves, or they run away, or they get into some kind of trouble and so on. And this kind of leads to a lot of that because the child is looking for some kind of alternative to the environment that, of course, they're not comfortable in. And this comes right along the heels of another axis, another venue, and that is that of a chaotic connection. The chaotic connection could include mental illness. It could include addictions. It could include even wrong actions of parenting, the father being used against the mother, with the children being the arbitrators or the manipulators. The father or the mother fall into an addiction, whether it's alcohol or drugs or whatever. All of these things play to the axis of breaking down a marriage or causing a marriage to move toward divorce. And that obviously creates an environment of conflict as well. Financial strains, this is another area. Financial strains, debt, because as you grow, you want to buy a house, and this constant battle between needs and wants. And now you've been married for a half a dozen years, and you're still in a certain level, and perhaps had greater dreams that you at this time would be in a different place with this individual that you've married, and consequently now are dissatisfied because you're stressed due to the fact that you don't have enough money to buy this, that, or the other thing, because this is a want, but that's a need, so the needs always seem to, vie for priority, and one thing after another, and you're constantly in battle. That strains the marriage. You can't sleep right, something's always on your mind, and that, of course, causes other ramifications like a house of cards, because when you're not feeling real comfortable about the individual you're with, well, romance and sex just don't seem to be in context. When you're ripe at night, it just don't seem to fly. And consequently, that begins to wane, and lo and behold, affection begins to wane, and one thing again leads to another, and again, the chasm between each other grows. Also, events such as dealing with illnesses or disabilities. Something happens, individuals get sick along the way after 10 years, 12 years of being in marriage. Something all of a sudden happens and your lifestyle completely changes. You got to go on hemodialysis. You've got leukemia. You've got some debilitating disease. You were in an accident and you lost your legs, or some, unfortunate thing happens, and now this mate who married you before is left with what's now the result of whatever it was, and lo and behold, the whole lifestyle changes. I say hemodialysis because, again, I was in water treatment, and I saw so often, many times, brethren, when back in the day when Medicare would pick up home dialysis, and many of the kidney patients would be trained at the Cleveland Clinic or trained at Case Western Reserve University Hospital, and then they would be sent home, and the mate would dialyze, or even sometimes a teenage child would dialyze the parent or dialyze the child, or whatever it might be. And I can't tell you how many times I was a service guy. I'd go in and out of the houses all the time, changing tanks and so on, our water treatment systems that would purify the water for the dialysis treatments. And you develop a relationship with those people after a while. You're like the milkman, You go in there and, sometimes they even had lunch waiting for you. I remember one time I had the lunch and the lady made me 2 pork chop sandwiches. And I had to figure out how I was going to politely excuse myself out of her goodwill to give me those 2 pork chop sandwiches. But at any rate, point being, I can't tell you how many times I saw divorces occur over a period of time when they went home, and then lo and behold, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years later, they're divorced because the mate abandoned the situation. They couldn't handle it. It was not what they were in for, so to speak, and so as a result, they abandoned the marriage. And of course, there is dealing with the in-laws or the outlaws, and getting divided in between, and pitting the husbands against the wives. The father of the wife just won't stay out of your way, the new man of the house, and as a result, he's got to take charge of your house, and it's your house, but it's his daughter, and so he won't give her up yet. I mean, he walked her down the aisle, he gave her up there, but you didn't realize he was moving in all the time during the week at night. Those things happen and become sometimes divisive, and as a result, obstacles in the development of the relationship there of the 2 individuals that just got married. And then, of course, betrayal in marriage, which doesn't have to result in divorce. It does not have to result in divorce. It can result in reconciliation. It's a question of how you work through that betrayal in that respect, assuming the betrayal is infidelity. Betrayal can be other things too, spending money that the other mate didn't know about, investing in certain things that the other mate didn't know about, and all those kinds of things that happen. And this is just a few things. I can't spend a lot of time on all the many things that there are that can cause marriages to go south or off the rails, as they would say. But I think you're getting the gist of what I'm trying to say, and that is we need to be vigilant in our relationships with our mates, because there are a lot of pressures and open doors, unlocked doors for either you on your own to self-inflict by virtue of your own negligence, laziness, or lack of interest, or just being selfish. We're all this way. Or Satan exacerbating things and giving you ideas to do the wrong thing when you know what the right thing is. But because you're not disciplining yourself, you're not vigilant, you're sleeping at the switch, you get caught in unawares, and as a result, we allow together certain things to occur. Now, I would hope that you could see some of the details that could occur in some of these areas that would cause changes to happen. I hope you can understand, even as I pointed out, as little as leaven in a cupboard with an unconverted mate could cause tension. These little kinds of details that sometimes we don't think through, that oftentimes now in the relationship we overlook and allow to ferment without even realizing it, and then it goes on for years upon years, and lo and behold, before you know it, we've got an environment that creeped up on us, but it didn't really creep up on us. We just kept winking at it. As the old saying goes, we kept kicking the can down the road. And we didn't address things. We didn't square off and confront. Because let's face it, how many of us like to confront an issue? You know, I don't like to confront. As much as I oftentimes throughout my career had to confront things just because of the nature of my career, nevertheless, the reality of it is I still didn't always like it. It's not something that we're comfortable in doing. Confronting is something that, you know, we would rather avoid or shy away from, or maybe put it off till tomorrow, because maybe it'll change. Maybe it'll be different tomorrow. Well, the point that I'm trying to make here, brethren, is all through all of these categories, I don't care whether it is the disability category, or whether it's the betrayal category, or whether it's the chaotic environment category, or whether it's the conflicting environment category, or the burnout category, all these things are the result of one commonality among them. There is one commonality among them. You know what it is? It's three things. Three things, real quick. Communication, 1. 2. Communication, 3. Communication. It's communication. Talking, confronting. I don't like that. What do you mean you don't like that? Well, this is why I don't like it. See, we oftentimes don't want to say certain things and confront because then we got to explain ourselves. And maybe we're not the best communicators. Well, guess what? Learn to communicate. Learn to communicate your feelings. This is important because you're in a relationship now. Meaning, what does that mean? That means you have a responsibility for somebody else right off the bat. When you say I do, for better or worse, because I've done a lot of marriages, a few of them. When you say that, that is a promise that you are going to take to the grave with this individual that is basically giving themselves to you. And communication, frankly, is the key. It's the key to a successful marriage. It really is. Regardless of how you may feel about it, regardless of whether or not you want to engage in it, you've got to learn to communicate and to immediately, as they say, nip the problem in the bud. B-U-D. That's not beer. That's in the early stages. Early stages. Early stages. It's important you nip it in the bud. The Bible says don't let the sun go down on your wrath. The Bible is emphatic to the point where don't go to bed mad. Don't go to bed mad. Don't let it, in other words, the principle is don't let it percolate. What does that lead to? That leads to holding grudges. Day 1, day 2, day 3. You know, eventually, give it up already. Where's this leading? Stop the grudge holding. What are we doing? You see, that just exacerbates things. It just exacerbates things. Talk it out. You've got to go outside and count to 10. Go outside and count to 10, but don't count to 20. Don't count to 100. Well, if you have to, go ahead. But my point, stop counting at some point and come back in and redress. 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 It's very important. Very important, brethren, to remember that understanding is tantamount to peace in the home. And that's mutual understanding. It's not just me getting you to understand me. Or you getting me to understand you. No. I live here too. Frog, cricket. Did you ever hear that joke? No, you probably don't. You don't know what I'm talking about. You think I'm lost my mind probably. Did you ever hear that joke? All the pond, the frogs are going ribbit, ribbit, ribbit. And the turtle finally says, enough is enough. Turtle! It wasn't funny, I know. I won't lose my day job. At any rate, my point, both of you rate. Both of you rate. And consequently, it is incumbent upon both of you, both of me and my wife, we together understand each other as she understands me and I understand her. And that's important. So, brethren, I want to give you some points, real quick points. We want to go through this rather quickly here, but I do want to give you some quick points on how to assure better communications. And one thing is for sure, point one is you need to be 100% in. 100, not 50. Not 50%. No, that don't work. You've got to be all in for this run. Because this run, when you say I do, there is no end. Until death do you part. That's what I always say in my service. Until death do you part. Divorce is not an option. I don't go into my marriage thinking I've got an out. I've got a trump card, pardon the pun, where I'm going to use it at some point down the road in this game of life. No, that doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. You go into the marriage till death do you part. That's the mindset. You're 100% in. And it's very important then, therefore, that you get one very important principle that Jesus Christ laid down for all of us in our Christian walk. You know what that is? It's better to give than to receive. It's better to give than to get. Meaning that you've got to be there for your mate all the time. All the time. You've got to be there for them in their down times as well as their up times. When you said I do, that's what it meant. For better or worse, I'm putting my eggs in your basket as you're putting your eggs in my basket, and we're going to share this life's adventure together from start to finish. And that's important. And along with that comes this responsibility to avoid conflict, this responsibility to avoid chaos, the responsibility to enjoy peace, the responsibility to have success, mutual success, because it's just not you using the other mate to launch off of for your success. No. The other mate needs to also come along with that success too, because you're a team. Marriage is a team effort. And so it is predicated. The protocol is to give. To give. It's better than to get in this regard. So that's an important principle to keep in mind. And Paul points this out as well in the sexual context in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, where he says, in this case, concerning the things whereof you wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Nevertheless, to avoid porneia, to avoid fornication, to avoid sex out of wedlock is what he's saying. To avoid this, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. Let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence. What's that? That's sexual obligations, sexual services. Let him render unto her due benevolence, and likewise also the wife to her husband, mutually consenting and conceding to one another in a romantic sexual expression of love and affection toward one another. It is the epitome of expression of your love and affection for each other. The sexual act, the sexual expression of two people becoming one is the greatest expression of love and affection, tenderness, and the embodiment of all that goes with caring for that individual is all wrapped up in that event. It's not just about satisfying our sexual desires. It's more than that, brethren. That's why Satan, the devil, has perverted it so badly. He's used it and perverted it, twisted it, maligned it, and put it in different concepts and framings that in some cases we can't even imagine with what he's done to the sexual act and the miscuing of relationships of our biologies as human beings. But the sexual act and all that goes with it, as Paul says here, the wife has not power, in verse 4, over her own body, but the husband likewise also. The husband has not power over his own body. Defraud, meaning don't refrain not one the other, except it be for consent. In other words, do not withhold. Do not withhold you not one of the other, except it be with consent for a time. In other words, you don't use the bed as a weapon. You don't weaponize, I'm not doing that until you apologize. I'm not involving myself, and you weaponize the sexual relation act. No. Paul's clear here. He says, unless it's for consent, for a time that you may give yourself to fasting and prayer. Why is that, you think? Because if there's an issue, hopefully you'll reconcile. If it takes some fasting and prayer to get back together, then do that. Defraud yourself for that, for sure. But don't go weaponizing sex within the marriage, or you will open up a door for Satan the devil, without a doubt. Without a doubt. So stay away from that kind of approach in this situation, because again, we have to be 100% in, 100% without any kind of hesitation, because the reflection of giving is a very important barometer that will rise to the level of determining how selfish you may be. What do I mean by that? Simply, selfish people have a hard time to be affectionate. Now, not all non-affectionate people are selfish, but if you're not affectionate, you need to work on it. I'm talking about toward your husband or toward your wife. You need to work on it. You need to connect. You're going to see some scriptures here, brethren, that are venues for us as human beings to make sure we've got this lock-in connection with our mate. It's so very important. And consequently, if we're not affectionate, we need to work on that. Because if you're affectionate, that bond of affection, brethren, is difficult for Satan or even for you or your mate to unravel. It's very hard. If there's a real affection of agape, of love, of real caring and concern toward one another, to rip that apart. If you've got a sincere sense of affection for that individual. So keep that in mind. If you're not an affectionate individual, do begin to recognize you need to work on that. Point 2, respect your spouse and your children. Over here in Philippians chapter 2. Philippians chapter 2, and in verse 3, breaking into the context for the sake of time, let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind let each esteem the other better than himself. Let me read that again. Let nothing be done through strife and vainglory or conceit or self-absorption, meaning you. It's all about you. But in lowliness of mind, meaning humility, let me, the husband, Bill, esteem, in my case, Margie, better than me. Now that's a challenge. Not just for me, but for all of us. Some of you may say, yeah, that's right, I believe that. No. Point being, brother, this is a challenge for all of us. To esteem our mate more than ourselves, meaning you're willing to sacrifice for them, if need be, more than yourself. And that's a difficult thing to do because so many of us think of ourselves more. But let me just take you real quickly here. Well, let's speed through a few scriptures. Galatians chapter 5, and I'm going to speed through them. Verse 26, so you better stay with me. Let us not be desirous of vainglory. That is, us in the context of marriage, do not be desirous of vainglory, provoking one another, envying one another. In other words, your marriage is not competition. It's not about you being the better mechanic at home, or not about you being the better housekeeper at home, or not you about being the better cook at home. It's not you about being the better provider for the family. It's not you about that at all. It's about this case. Let us not be desired of vainglory, provoking one another, envying one another. It's not competition. When you're married, it's a partnership. It's, what can I do for you, babe? What can I do for you, honey? I used to have a sales manager that would penalize the performers. And I was of the philosophy, that's why we always locked horns, of the fact that if I had a sales guy that was knocking down the numbers, I would ask him, what can I do to get you in front of the customer faster? Can I buy you a Corvette, a Porsche, something, to get you into the customer's face more often? No, you don't hold back, in other words, your mate, is what I'm saying. You don't hold them back. You work with them and find out what you can do to support, facilitate, and serve. In other words, how can I help my husband? How can I help my wife be a better wife, be a better husband, a better man, a better woman, a better mother, a better father? How can I help them? And if I think I'm better at mothering or whatever, or I'm more affectionate, how can I help my husband be more affectionate? What can I tell him to do? Is there something I might be able to read and email him, or read and communicate to him something and talk to him? Maybe we sometimes say, oh, I don't know what to talk about to my mate. Well, wow, there's a lot of things to talk about. Talk about each other. How to help each other. These kinds of things. That's important. James chapter 3. James chapter 3, real quickly here. Time is moving. Boy, I'm telling you. James 3, verse 13. Who is a wise man and endued with knowledge among you? Let him show out of good conduct his works with meekness and wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and strife in your hearts, glory not and lie not against the truth. In other words, this word strife could also mean rivalry. This wisdom descends not from above, but is earthly, sensual, devilish. Verse 16, James 3. For where envying and strife, rivalry, is, there is confusion and every evil work. But the wisdom that is from above, this is from God, first, pure, peaceable, gentle, easy to be entreated, full of mercy, good fruit, without partiality, it's fair, and without hypocrisy. You do what you say. You carry through with, and you're a doer of what you propose and what you claim to be, and you manifest it. Verse 18, and the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that make peace. Romans 12, back over here, after Acts. Romans chapter 12, and in verse 10, real quickly here, breaking into the context for the sake of time. Be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love, in honor, preferring one another. In other words, respect and honor each other. That is what we need to do in this regard. We need to, as pointed out before, is to respect your spouse and your children. And along with that, of course, comes honoring. I don't know if you ever read the book. I didn't read it, but I did read excerpts from it, and I have reviews from it, and also some high points from the book that women are from Venus and men are from Mars. And in essence, the book is that women, they need affection and men need respect. And there's a different communication line there. There is a communication line that is certainly, I think, sage for all of us to recognize as human beings as we attempt to try to work through the challenges of developing our relationship that we're in our marriage. And so this is what Paul here is talking about in Romans 12. 1 Peter chapter 5, way back here by Revelation. 1 Peter chapter 5. 1 Peter chapter 5, and in verse, real quickly here, verse 5. Likewise, you younger, submit yourselves unto the elder. Yea, all of you be subject one to another, and be clothed with humility. For God resists the proud, and gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you. And I don't know about you, but there were times in our marriage, in Margie's and I's, and I'll just volunteer this a little bit, that, things got pretty tough throughout the course of our 50 years of marriage. And yeah, there were ups and downs. There were valleys and peaks. And there were times when, we had to go to pray about certain things. And it's nothing to be ashamed of, brethren, because we're all human in that way. We all have our issues that we have to deal with. And sometimes we come up on roadblocks. But if you communicate and you do it in humility, and you do it with the intent of trying to understand you, it's not about just me. It's you too, and me too. And where's this middle ground? Where's this moderate lot we can land on where we're both happy and not just you? Because marriage is not about appeasing the other. Marriage is about mutual respect and honor so that there is mutual happiness and peace between both parties, mom and dad for sure. The kids are another story. Honestly, the kids are another story because they've got their own minds and they've got their own affections set. But if they've been brought up, your Bible's very clear about that, as youngsters, there's going to be an affection there that will connect with you and the other mate all the time to afford you, hopefully, the handles you need to get the understanding through the communicative efforts that is necessary to keep the children on the rails. Sadly, today, I think it's fair to say, I don't want to oversimplify it, but I think moms and dads today in general, by virtue of the Antifas and the Black Lives Matter kids that I see on the street, and these 20-year-olds and 18-year-olds, the language coming out of girls and the frantic just craziness of some of the actions of these young people on the streets in the cities of Portland, in the cities of Seattle, in the cities of New York, in our cities today, illustrate to me moms and dads in a large swath, in a large area are MIA, sadly. Or these youngsters, I don't believe, would be where they are. But they are there. And it's something we're dealing with. And it's something that all of us need to recognize that our children are precious and we need to be very vigilant about them, especially with all of the things that surround us today. So it's very important, brethren, very important. And these are all living laws that we're reading here through these scriptures, without a doubt, and they do come back to haunt us if we do not exercise them in our lives. I want to just go back on one word and revisit it real quickly here, and that is this word conceit. The word conceit, I looked it up because I thought I knew what conceited was. I thought, back in high school, the quarterback of the football team, the guys that would, be pretty good at certain things that they were doing and let you know about it. I thought that was, pretty conceited. Or girls who really thought they were hot, and good looking, and boy, they could get any boy they wanted to get, in high school and what have you. And I used to think that there were some girls that were somewhat conceited. And conceit is basically that in some respects. It's the feelings of excessive importance. See, I'm more important than you, honey, because I got the job. You're the woman. So sit down, cook, and keep the house clean. That's not a recipe for success. That is not a recipe for success. And that's what you got to guard against, brethren. We got to guard against this feelings of excessive importance, pride. A person, this is another meaning, a person with an exaggerated sense of self-importance, egotistical, or an individual considered fat-headed. And generally, these are people you can't talk to because they think they're so right all the time, know-it-alls. They know it all. And so there's nothing else you can teach them because they've arrived and they've stopped looking because they think they found everything. And so therefore, they don't see themselves as they are because they've stopped looking. They can't improve anymore because, I hate this statement, but they say it a lot. Been there, done that. Been there, done that. Ever hear somebody say that? Been there, done that. Oh, I hate that. I hate that word or statement because it is just so self-serving. No, there's always something. Even if you've been there and you've done that, maybe you need to redo it. And do it again and learn something you didn't learn going through it the first time. You know? And maybe you ought to ask yourself, why am I doing this again when I already went through it once? Or why am I doing this a third time since I've already done it twice? Maybe you aren't learning the lesson that you need to learn. Maybe. Just a thought. And maybe it's that you don't know all that you think you know. Maybe. Just a thought. But something certainly to consider. So the point that I want to make is, it's very important, brethren, that I think that we do indeed keep ourselves in perspective. And as Peter says over here, just in a page back in chapter 3, 1 Peter chapter 3, and in verse 7, likewise, you husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker, not spiritually, not emotionally, not mentally. But men, you're the protectors of the family. And men, you need to rise to the occasion to be the protectors of your wife and your children. That's important. And wives, like Proverbs 31 states, need to be the support mechanisms and or the contributing factors in the partnership to continue to help the success of the greater whole of the family. That's what Proverbs 31 is all about, that virtuous woman that's described there in chapter 31. And so here he says, the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together, that's important, that's the partnership concept, of grace, of life, that your prayers be not hindered. Because if you're at odds with one another, and you are in a difficult situation where there's a lot of tension, God is looking down upon that marriage and partnership saying, look, you better get yourselves together here. It's important. And invoke God's involvement in that situation, without a doubt. Very important to do. I'm going to stop at this point because I've got a few more that I wanted to share, and I'm not going to get rushed through this. So I'm going to pick it up next Sabbath and finish it up. But until then, we'll continue to talk about marriage and the points of access that oftentimes can attack our marriages that we need to be aware of.